Hello YouTube, I'm Scruffy at Scruffy Tales and welcome back to this very special episode of The War Zone. And we will be dealing with a potential rumor that the S-tank has been spotted in Ukraine. Yes, the actual Swedish S-tank has potentially... No, it hasn't, I'm just kind of goofing around. There is no S-tank in Ukraine whatsoever. Clickbait, yada yada yada. But there's a reason I'm making this video. And the reason is, over the months, it keeps popping up in the comment section in my videos. And I'm assuming elsewhere as well. The question, how would the S-tank perform in Ukraine in a modern war? Could we potentially sell some to Ukraine, or could Ukraine build some, or whatever? And it popped up again, this question, in my latest video, dealing with how the Swedish STRV 122 tank and the Archer artillery system are very effective tank destroyers down in Ukraine. So we have Christian 069 asking the question, what would such a tank do on the battlefield down in Ukraine? And to the question if I have made a video on the S-tank, yes I have. Here it is, the S-tank, the world's deadliest tank. And I'll see if I can remember to put a link to that video down below, but you have the thumbnail there if you want to go look for it, if I forget the link. So that's why I'm making this video. It's just, you know, the question keeps popping up. What would Ukraine be able to do with the S-tank if they had it? And so I'm rambling, as I always do. Let's just get on with it, shall we? And dogs are playing in the background if you hear something. Anyway, moving on. What made the S-tank so special back in the day, in the 60s and 70s? Well, back in those days, stabilization for the main gun wasn't really a thing yet. It was, or if a tank had it, it was unreliable at best. Which means, or which meant that every tank, all tanks, in order to engage a target, they had to stop and then turn the turret to shoot. So, in that environment, on that kind of battlefield, Sweden developed the S-tank, and the point was that you basically made the vehicle into the turret, or the turret into the vehicle. So, like every other tank, it stopped and turned to shoot. That was, you know, nothing strange at all. What made the S-tank so special was that it could turn faster than any other turret, right? So, just like any other tank, they would drive up, find the target, stop. And like any other tank, it would then turn the gun, in this case the entire vehicle, to face the target and shoot. And the S-tank could turn its gun faster than any other tank.
And I just realized I've been using the wrong microphone to record. Yeah. Anyway, moving on with the correct microphone. So yeah, and with the autoloader allowing the S-tank to fire one round every 3 seconds, as you can imagine, if you're driving up, you're turning, and then you can just pound a target until it detonates, right? Which made the S-tank a very, very capable main battle tank. And you also had the advantage that the commander could easily look around and spot targets, helping the gunner. And also, famously, the gunner and the commander had the same setup at each individual position in the tank. So if the gunner was wounded or killed, the commander could act as the gunner. And the gunner was, of course, also the driver. So the commander would then be gunner and the driver, right? So you only needed one crew member to operate this vehicle, thanks to the autoloader. So even if you had casualties or wounded and what have you, as long as one guy was still alive, this tank could remain a threat on the battlefield. And what else? Yeah, and of course you had the famous ability that it could go equally fast in reverse as it was able to go forward. Thanks to the radio operator sitting facing the rear, he could also be handed control of the vehicle. And so he would look at the rear of the tank and then he would drive. And it would go just as fast in reverse as it would go forward. So made it an excellent shoot and scoot tank. You could drive up with a low profile, find cover where a enemy tank could not see it, open fire 2 or 3 times, and then relying on the radio operator, the tank could then go like a bat out of hell, basically, straight in reverse and avoid any incoming shots. Ingenious. Not this wasn't anything you goddamn dogs playing. Sweden had similar ideas for a scout vehicle in the 30s, where you it was basically a small car, armored car, where you had a 20mm gun in a turret, and if you ended up in trouble, you could just switch over so the guy in the rear facing the rear could could just drive away without the need to turn the vehicle around. So the concept was alive and well in the Swedish minds when the SRV-103 was developed. There's this persistent myth that the S-tank was built only for defense, only for shoot and scoot, like we just talked about. It was a defensive tank, an ambush tank, and it was meant to give ground while killing as many invading Soviets as possible. Partially true. The Swedish defense plans of the Cold War basically said that during the initial phases of the war, the Soviets would have numbers on their side we won't be able to hold if they're pushing in from the north through the famous Kalix line. So what the Swedish regiments up in the north would have to do would be to fight a strategic retreat while the rest of the armed forces could assemble and gather enough troops and manpower and equipment to launch a counterattack to then throw out the Russians out of the country. So it is this initial stage of the Swedish defense plans that sort of have gained a life of its own, that the S-tank is only a defensive tank that, you know, opens fire, pulls back, open fires, pull back, and you give ground to the Russians as they're pushing forward, and you try and knock out as many enemy targets as possible. But people seem to have forgotten the next phase of the war plans, and that is the counterattack, to reclaim lost territory. And of course, the S-tank wasn't a defensive tank. It was a main battle tank intended to assault enemy positions head-on. And like I said, all tanks at the time had to stop, turn the turret, and then shoot. So the S-tank would do the exact same thing. Stop, turn the gun, and shoot. So it could very effectively function as an aggressive main battle tank, and it was proven to be very effective in this role. It took part in multiple training exercises and evaluation trials with NATO countries. And one NATO country after the other, the UK, West Germany, the United States, they all in the end concluded that the S-tank had no drawbacks whatsoever compared to standard tanks with a turret. This was, of course, up until stabilized guns became very capable and became reliable. It was the stabilized gun that eventually made the S-tank obsolete. But up until that point, this was perhaps the most effective main battle tank in the world. And further proof of the intended purpose of this tank as being an aggressive main battle tank was how Swedish doctrine intended to use them right next to the very heavy APC, the PBV 302, that was intended to be used by armored infantry in storming enemy positions like trench lines, foxholes, buildings, what have you. So the tanks would be driving right next to the APCs as they were advancing up to the objective to unload the troops that could then storm the trench line with hand grenades and what have you. And in so doing, providing these stormtroopers with very heavy fire support. So the S-tank was very much intended to be an aggressive tank meant to challenge the enemy on the battlefield, take ground, move up to the enemy position, outflank them with its fast-turning gun, and outmaneuver the enemy and kill him in offensive action. So the whole notion that this was a defensive tank is a bit of a myth. It excelled at both parts of armored combat, defense and offense. This was a great tank for both purposes. So, could the S-tank provide anything to Ukraine in a modern setting? Well, I guess it could. I mean, they're bringing in tanks from the 50s, so why not a tank from the 60s and 70s, right? So it has a big gun. It has 3 machine guns, and if you aim it at an enemy location, the enemy won't be very happy when this thing starts shooting, that's for sure. However, is it a viable option in a modern setting? Other than, yes, it brings guns to the battlefield. I don't know. Sure, if in Ukraine it might actually work as a defensive tank, just like the myth says about the tank itself. In that, with all the mines, it is difficult for a tank like this without a turret to advance. You know, it can only go in a straight line. If you find that path through the minefields, it has to follow that path, and that means it can only shoot in that direction. It can't turn in the minefield to open fire on various targets, right? So that is an obvious downside to not having a turret. You risk hitting a mine that may just be a foot or two off to the side of this cleared path. So it wouldn't be useful for Ukraine in taking the fight to the Russians. That said, if it's operating in secured in an area that the Ukrainians have secured, they know where they can move without hitting mines and what have you. I guess then you could actually move up to a windbreak, find a hole in the among all the bushes and trees, and open fire on the enemy further down on the far side of the field. And again here, the ability to go full speed in reverse would be useful. You can roll up to a secure position, open fire a couple times to help out infantry or what have you, and then the radio operator, he just takes over and drives you out of harm's way along a path, known path, by the way, the same path you drew up to the position. So I guess it could work in that capacity. One thing that definitely does speak in its favor is the lack of a turret. And hear me out here. And what do I mean by this? Well, lacking a turret, it is not as heavy as other tanks. That means you can add quite a lot of armor and cope cages and what have you to this thing, which would make it extremely safe from top attacks, from drones, from missiles, artillery shells, and what have you. So with that in mind, you could make this a very capable vehicle to withstand incoming dangerous hits from above. But overall, I think the lack of a turret just doesn't make it useful on a modern battlefield. Could it be used to help infantry and stuff like that? Obviously, it has a big gun. It has lots of machine guns. If you get this in a good position, it will wreak havoc on enemies downrange, just like any weapon systems. That is why Russia is bringing back tanks from the 50s, because they have a big gun, and that gun is armored. And if it starts shooting on the enemy is in trouble. And the same thing goes for an S-tank. The problem is, of course, the main problem is the very advanced and technical hydraulic systems that allows the tank to shift position to align the gun with the target. Since the gun is fixed in the hull, the entire hull must move. That is why the S-tank so famously can rock back and forth and twist and turn the hull on the tracks. And that is because the gun is fixed, so you need to move the entire hull to align with the target. Now this hydraulic system is, as you can imagine, kind of advanced and technical in nature, and requires a lot of maintenance. And oh, the dogs are at it again. So that would probably be a major issue. So yes, you can add armor to it, and it can deal out a lot of punishment. But as soon as it starts taking hits, the tank would probably break down in short order due to the internal hydraulic systems starting to leak all over the place, and then the tank can't shift position on its own axis in order to effectively open fire on a target further downrange. So in the end, I still think that the S-tank probably is not a good choice for a modern battlefield. The design itself, maybe if you build something new today from scratch and sort out a lot of the issues with the hydraulics and what have you, then yes, maybe. If you build it from scratch with modern techniques, modern materials, electronics and what have you, then yes, then maybe. But as a concept, I don't think it's a viable option for a modern battlefield. If you were to take a couple of S-tanks and make them work again, and if you ship them down to Ukraine, I'm pretty sure the Ukrainians would love to put them to use. It has a big gun, it has an autoloader, and it can dish out a lot of punishment to anyone downrange, obviously. So, you know, it's going to be useful, but the question is, how long will it be useful before it breaks down? And I think the original S-tanks will probably break down in short order if you put them in a modern battlefield. That's all I have for you at this point. No, I don't think the S-tank will benefit Ukraine all that much. Like I said, maybe if you build a brand new one relying on modern techniques, modern materials, modern everything, then maybe, and that's a big maybe. But I don't think Ukraine will benefit at all if we manage to get a couple of S-tanks working and ship them down there. That won't help them at all, I think. Yeah, that answers the question. Or that's me providing my opinion on the question on whether or not Ukraine should be getting S-tanks. So no, they should not. They should be getting STRV-122s that can actually kick ass for real, and other Leopard 2 tanks, obviously. So anyway, I'm gonna have to deal with my dogs, and you're gonna have a very nice day. And as always, gå på marsch, Ukraine. Give them hell.